Hey there, this is Kamal, and in this video we'll be learning about Docker. We'll try to understand what is Docker, what is the architecture behind Docker, what are images, containers, and we'll also understand the few basic commands that you need to know in order for you to get started with Docker. Once that is done, we'll try to host an application in our own Docker containers to see how that works. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get this started. Alright, so first things first, what is Docker? So Docker is a virtualization software which is basically used to develop, deploy, and manage all of your applications easily. It does this by using two of the main things that it has called as images and containers. So before jumping into that, let's first try to understand what is the difference between Docker and a virtual machine. So in order to understand the difference between Docker and a virtual machine, you first need to understand what kind of layer they actually virtualize internally. So basically Docker virtualizes the application layer, meaning it doesn't have its own kernel. Instead, it uses the host operating system's kernel. But whereas a virtual machine has its own kernel and uses that for its own applications. So if you look at the pictorial representation here, you'll see that in Docker, we have a layer on top of the host operating system. And on top of that, we have all the containers inside which we have all the applications. But whereas when it comes to virtual machines, we don't actually use the host operating system, but instead on top of the operating system that is already present, we have an isolated environment in which it has its own kernel, it has its own operating system, and in that it has its own applications. That is where the difference lies. And the main reason why people shift towards Docker is because virtual machines are really CPU intensive, but whereas Docker, they are really light and you can easily install them on any system anywhere pretty easily. Alright, so now let's jump into Docker and let's see some of the concepts there. So when you try to understand Docker, you first need to understand two main concepts. One is images and the second one is containers. So basically an image is a representation of our code. So it's a snapshot. You can think of it like a template that is used to spin up containers. For example, you can take SQL or you can take Nginx, which are basically images or pieces of code that you can run. And containers are the environment in which you can run these images. So basically you can think of like running Ubuntu inside of a server. So server could be thought of as a container and Ubuntu as the image. Similar way, containers are virtual environments in which you can run some piece of software or some piece of code, and that piece of code is an image. Now in order to get these images, you can create your own images or you can get those from publicly available repositories. Those kind of repositories are called as registries. Okay, so basically you have many registries available online, and the major one that is being used by default by Docker is Docker Hub. So in Docker Hub, you can actually get the images of multiple softwares like Nginx or MySQL or MongoDB or lot more things. You can pick those images and you can download that to your system and install that into your own container. Similarly, you can also create your own image as well. So later down in this video, we'll see how we can create our own image to host an Angular application inside a Docker container as well. But before that, let's try to understand few of the basic commands that you need to know inside of Docker. So in order to get started with Docker, you first need to install Docker on your native system. As of now, if you have a Linux-based operating system, the setup is pretty easy. But if you have Windows or a Mac-based operating system, then it's pretty easy to download something called as Docker Desktop. The Docker Desktop is basically a bundle of two main things. One is a Docker client and the second one is Docker daemon. So basically Docker daemon is the integral part of Docker which runs everything, whereas Docker client is something that you interact with, which will in turn interact with the Docker daemon, which does all the operations, okay, like basically creating containers, stopping containers, deleting containers and everything. So let's open the browser and let's go to docker.com, and in the docker.com you can go to the download section, or in the homepage itself you'll have the option to download for your main operating system. So I've already downloaded that in my system and I've installed that. So now let's try to open the Docker desktop. Alright, so when you open this is the interface that you're going to be provided with. So when you start the Docker desktop, that will internally start all the Docker specific things. So before trying to learn the Docker commands, let's first go to the registry, that is the Docker Hub, and see what are the images that we have, and let's try to download one image. So let's open the browser once again and let's go to Docker Hub. Alright, so once you log in, you can see that we have few things here on the home page itself, and these are basically the images which are available for you right now. But you can browse through the whole directory of images available here, and you'll pretty much find all the official images of all the major software that are available right now in the market. So for this particular video, let's try to use the node image. So let's open that, and you can see there are a few things here, but at the top right you'll see that there is a command called as docker pull node. So let's copy that and let's go back to the terminal instance. Alright, so now let's paste that, and as you can see that this command is split into three main things. One is docker, then second one is pull, and the third one is node. Docker is the base command that you use. pull is the instruction that you're giving, and node is the image that you're trying to pull onto your native system. So let's type that in and let's click on enter. So you can see that Docker is trying to pull this particular image called as node onto our system, and it is doing that through multiple layers. So basically all the images that are there inside of Docker are split into multiple sections or multiple layers, and it tries to download each of the layer one after the other so that it can download the whole thing really easily. Okay, so now that is done, you can see that there are multiple things that are being printed onto the screen. The first thing that you observe here is that it is saying using default tag latest. So basically when it comes to images, there are a few things that you need to know. That is that in Docker Hub, every image has its own tag. So if I now go back to the Docker Hub, you'll see that apart from this command, you can see that below there is a section called as supported tags and respect to Docker file links. So down here, you have multiple versions of the node image. And all of these versions have specific node version. Basically, what it means is that if you have node and for your particular project, you just want to use node 10 or you want to use node 16 or you want to use specific version of your node, then you can download that specific version or that specific image on your system as well. What this command does is that it's going to pull the latest version of node, but down here you have multiple tags defining multiple versions of node, and in those multiple versions as well you have multiple things which are defined for multiple operating systems, like this is for Bullseye or this is for Alpine. So it seems like we have from 16 here till the latest one, and also if you want just the latest one, you can directly type in latest, which is the default one. So you can find out the differences and you can choose the one which suits for your own particular project. Right, so now let's go back and let's now see the image that we've directly downloaded. So another command that you can use to see the images that you've downloaded is called as Docker images. So this particular command will tell you the Docker images that you have on your particular system. So as you can see here, there's one image called as node and another image called as node latest. So the difference between these two images is that this particular node that I have is an image which I have downloaded a while ago, and it is a LTS Alpine version. But the one here is the node latest one. So these are images which are having same image name but are differentiated based on the tag. So in this way you can download that and look through that as well. Now every image has its own image ID as well, which are being used by Docker internally. Apart from this, there are a few more images which are there, which I use for testing, and there is another image called as Angular app, which we will be creating later down in this particular video. So now let's clear the screen. So now that you downloaded the image, now let's try to see how we can use that image and spin up a new container. So the way that you can do that is by using a command called as run. So just type in docker space run and then type in the image name. So let's go back and let's see the images once again. You can see the image name is going to be node, right? So apart from node, you also have to specify the tag for that. So let's type in docker run node latest. Okay, so now that you have done that, you'll see that it has executed something, but you don't see any output. That is because node is not something that's going to keep on running continuously. So let's try to start something else. Let's try to start the Nginx that we have already downloaded. So let's type in docker run Nginx, and I'll take the stable version for that. So now let's try to see whether it has actually created a new container or not. So let's open a new terminal instance. Now in here, let's type in docker space ps. So ps is a command that you can use to check the running containers right now. So as you can see, some information has been printed. So it has printed the container ID, the image name, the command that is being used, and the timestamp of it, some statuses of it. It was also printed the port that is being exposed in the container and the name of the container itself. So these are the things that are present specifically for this particular container. So now let's also see that whether node was created or not. So basically what happened with node was that node is not something that's going to run continuously. So in order to actually see whether the node container was created or not, you can add a new flag into it called -a. So let's type in docker again, then ps, give a space and type in -a. That's going to list out all the Docker containers. So as you can see, there is one container called as node latest, which was created 4 minutes ago, and it was exited 4 minutes ago itself. So basically it started off and it closed off as well, because node is not something that's going to run continuously. Whereas Nginx was created and it is still up. Okay, it has been 3 minutes since it was up. So basically what's happening is that Nginx is continuously running. But the main disadvantage, as you can see here, is that it's running in our instance right now here. And that means that this terminal is blocked. We cannot use it for something else. but we don't want that to happen. We want that to run in the background. So the way that you can do that is you can add a new flag here as well called as -d. So one thing that you have to remember here is that a lot of things inside of Docker will have few basic commands but a lot of flags. Okay, so you have to understand those flags, what those do, and how you can use that in your own Docker commands as well. So now let's stop this particular instance and let's type in docker ps. You'll see that there are no containers which are running right now. So let's clear the screen and let's type in docker run nginx stable, and now before the image name, what I'll do is that I'll just type in -d. That's going to say run it in a detached mode. Now if I run that, you'll see ID was printed, which is basically the container ID. Now let's type in docker ps and you'll see that the container is running once again. But now if I type in docker ps -a, you'll see that a new container for nginx was created. It was not using the existing container that was already created. Okay, and as you can see, each of these containers have a name, but these names are not something that you are defining. It is being defined by Docker directly, and all of these are random names. So if you want to specifically give a particular name to your own container, what you can do is that you can add another flag to your own command. So for now, let's stop the container that is already running here. So I'll just type in docker stop, then I'll give the ID of the container. In this case, I'll type that in. You can also give the container name as well. Okay, now let's type in the ps command once again, and you'll see that all of these are stopped right now. Now what I'll do is that I'll change the name of this, or I'll try to create a new container. So basically what a run command does, it tries to pull that image onto your native system. If it doesn't already have it, then tries to start that container. But what a start command does is it tries to start an existing container which was already created. So in this case, you already have a container with a container ID. So let's type in docker start space a container ID. So I'll copy that and give a space here. Now let's type in docker ps and you'll see that it has been started. So now let's give a name to the container. So we'll not use this container, we'll create a new container for that. So let's type in docker run, give a space -d, which is going to be detached mode. Then I'll type in -name, give a space, and then you can type in a name that you want. Let's type in nginx _ stable. Then let's give in the name of the image, nginx stable. Okay, so I spelled the docker command wrong. Okay, so now let's clear the screen. Okay, so seems like a new container was created, and as you can see here, we have now two containers with different names. One was the name that we have given, and one was the name which was created randomly by Docker. So now you can use a name directly instead of using the container ID as well. So let's try to stop our existing old container. You'll see that that container has stopped. Alright, so let's clear the screen. Alright, so apart from this, if you had observed, you have seen that there is a port specified on the Docker container section. So if I type in docker ps, you'll see that there is a port here saying 80, which is basically the port which is exposed inside of the container. Now you can use your own local port to connect to that port. That is something called as port forwarding. So what does that do? So what it does is basically it connects your local system's port to the container's port so that you can interact with it. So what you can do is that, let's say you have deployed your website onto a Docker container. Now if you want to look at that website on your local system, you have to use localhost : then you have to give a port. Now that port that you have specified here is your system's port, but the port specified here is the Docker container's port. Now we have to find a way to establish a connection between these two, right? That is what we're trying to do. So we are trying to do port forwarding. That is, when you, let's say you type in localhost : 8080, that port 8080 will be linked to 80 port inside the Docker container. And the way that we can do that is by using something called as a -p flag. So for that, let's try to create a new instance and let's try to see the differences here. So I'll type in docker run, I'll give a space and I'll type in -d for detached mode. Then I'll give it a name, let's say nginx port exposed, then give a space, and then you can type in the port number. In this case, I'm going to link the port 8080 to the port 80 of the container, and I'll just type in the name of the image. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that this port 8080 is our system port, whereas this port 80 is the container's port. So it's going to be the system port and this is going to be the source port. So let's click on enter and let's type in docker ps once again. Now you'll see that it's going to say something like 000 8080 of 80. That means this is representing your local host and it is a port 8080 that is being linked to the 80 port inside this particular container. Now let's open the browser and let's go to this particular port. Let's open a new tab and let's type in localhost 8080. Okay, so before closing off this section, there are two more commands that you need to know. The first command is going to be something that you can use to check the logs inside of the particular container. So you can type in docker space logs, and then you can type in the container ID or the container name. And once you do that, it's going to print out the latest logs. So basically what it's doing is that it is printing out whatever was printed when we started the Docker container. So you can see previously we had tried to use a GET request to open the particular localhost 8080, and it had opened that on a Chrome based browser. So now there's another command called as exec command, which is basically used to log in directly to your Docker container. So let's clear off the screen. Let's type in docker ps once again. Now let's try to log into the first container. So I'll type in docker space exec, exec, give a space, -it, which is going to be interactive, and give a space, and then type in the container ID, give a space, /bin/bash. So basically what you're doing is that you're using the exec command to execute something inside of the Docker container. You can use this to execute some other commands as well, but what we're trying to do is that we want to log into the bash of that particular instance. So basically what this is going to do is that when I run this, it's going to connect to the bash of that particular container. Now, since I'm inside the container, if I type in ls, you'll see it's going to list out all the folders inside of the Docker container. Similarly, you can use execute command to execute some small queries as well, which are one time. But if you want to execute something more inside of the Docker container, then this is not the ideal way to do so. Alright, so now let's clear off the screen. And with this, we're basically done with all the basic commands that you need to know. But as you can see, we are still not able to use this for our own projects. So the way that you can use this for your own projects is to use something called as Docker file. So basically what that is you create a Docker file inside of your project structure. And in that Docker file, you define the commands that you want to execute sequentially inside of Docker. So all the process that we had done previously, like downloading a container, installing that, running a few commands on it, or moving your files onto the Docker container, all of that can be controlled through the Docker file inside of your project structure. Okay, so for the next couple of steps, let's try to use an existing project and let's try to host that into a Docker container. So let's open GitHub for that. Okay, so if you go to GitHub and go to the packetcode community section, you'll see that under the repository section, we have a repository called as Docker Crash Course. So let's open that. And in this particular Docker Crash course, there is a dummy Angular application that you can use to test out Docker container. And apart from that, I've also included the Docker summary as well, like the crash course of it. I've included a few images, so you can go through that and you can use this as your cheat sheet as well. So now let's try to download this into our system and let's try to host that. So there is already a Docker file here. I'll delete that and let's create a new Docker file. So let's copy the HTTPS, let's minimize that. So let me go to my projects folder. Let's open a new terminal instance here. And in here, I'm going to type in git clone that link, give a space and dot. So let's see what we have here. Alright, so now let's open this in code. Alright, so now let's minimize this. Let's zoom in a bit here. Alright, so now let's delete the Docker file. Apart from the Docker file, let's also delete the Docker ignore file. So we'll see what these are. Alright, so now let's minimize this folder structure and let's create a new terminal instance here. Let's first try to understand how we manually host the Angular project. So in order to set up the project, you type in NPM Install. So what this command is going to do is that it's going to install all the necessary packages required for this particular project to run. Right? So similarly, let's also do that in our own application as well. But before doing that, what we have to do is that we have to have a base on which we can run this. Like in this case, we are running our commands on an operating system called as Windows. So in this case as well, we have to have an operating system, right? The base operating system. So first let's create the Docker file. In the Docker file, we have to actually import an image. And that is because all of the things that are there inside of Docker are basically images, right? So we can use a base image for our own custom images as well. In this case, we'll use the Alpine version of the node so that we can have a base Linux system. So let's go back to the Docker Hub. In here, let's go to node and let's download the 16 version of that. So I'll take the 16 LTS, or we can go with the 16 Alpine version. So I'll copy the 16 Alpine 3.7. So the way that you can use that is, let's go back here and let's type in from, give a space, then type in node, give a colon, and then type in the tag of that particular image. So in this case, it's going to be 16-Alpine. You can even go ahead with that particular version of it, but I'll just stick with the node Alpine. So with that, we have our base image. So before going and typing out the command of npm install, we have to first go to the particular location wherein we can copy our files and paste it there, and then we can run the npm install command. So for that, we have to change our working directory. So for that, we'll type in workdir, that is basically working directory. Then in here, I'll type in usr, which is user /src/app. So what I'm trying to do is that inside of the user folder, inside of the src folder, I'm trying to create an app folder. So that is specifically present inside of the Linux system. Now inside of this, I want to copy all my files. So basically what these two dots mean is that copy everything that is there inside the current folder to the working directory. That means all these files will be copied over to the working directory that is present inside of this, right? But the problem with this is that you'll see that node modules will also be copied over, and we don't want that to happen. So similar to how we have a git ignore, which is going to ignore a few things, we also have something called as docker ignore, which is basically going to ignore a few things when you're trying to create and run a Docker file. So in this case, I'll create a .docker ignore. In the docker ignore file, I'll type in node modules, and let's save that and let's close that off. Once we have copied over all the files, we have to run the command called as npm install. And the way that we can do that is by typing in run space npm space install. Now that is gonna install all the required dependencies for our project. So once that is done in our local system as well, we create or build our application, right? So for that, we use something called as npm run build, which is gonna basically run our build script. Right, so let that happen here. Similarly, let's also create our own thing here. So I'll type in run space npm. Now this is also going to run the build command inside of our working directory. But generally, whenever in a Docker file, the command that you're using is, let's say, the last command, we don't use run. Instead, we use cmd. And with that, we are actually done with our image. So basically what this is going to do is that it's going to create an Alpine version of the node. And in that container, it's going to go to this particular working directory or this particular location. Then it's going to copy all the files that are there inside this particular folder to this particular folder present inside of the location. Then it's going to go into that and it's going to run npm install. Then after that is done, it's going to run the npm run build command, and that is going to complete our build process. But there's a catch here, and that is once you have run the build as well, you can still not see the application, and that is because it is not being hosted in any of the servers. That is, it is not being hosted in a Linux server, or it is not being hosted in an Nginx server or Apache server or anything like that. It is just there built in a container. Right now, inside the container, we also need to have a server which can serve our application. Right, in this case, it's going to be our Angular application. And for that, we are going to use the Nginx server, which we have already downloaded. So what I'll do is that since it is not our last command, I'll just keep it as run. Now below this, I'll import another image and we're going to use that. Alright, so as you can see, our dist was created. So this dist is going to have our application files, right? So as you can see, this dist doesn't need to be copied over, right? So let's open the docker ignore and let's also write dist folder. Let's save that and close it off. Right, so when copying, this will not be copied over. Alright, so as I've said previously, let's try to instantiate a new image. And this process of creating multiple images inside of a single Docker file is called as multistage build process, okay? So we are doing that multistage build. So let's type in from, I'll take the Nginx stable version of it. Now below this Nginx, what I want to do is I want to run my Angular application. But in order to do that, we have to first say that this is one instance and I want to run that instance inside of my second instance. So I have to define this using something called as. Now what this is going to do is that it's going to say that this whole thing will be referred to as something called as a build. So this build is basically a normal string. I can even say something like build files, which is basically just a string which is defining this Angular application. I'm going to use this and I'm going to run that Angular application inside my Nginx server. So for that, what we have to do is that we have to copy the build files which were created in this to our Nginx location. Basically, in order to host files inside of Nginx, you have to copy the files to a specific location inside of the Nginx folder directory. So we're going to copy our dist directories files onto a specific location inside the same container. So I'll type in copy space from and I'll type in build files. So from build files, and inside the build files, I want to go to the user directory. and inside that let's go to the source folder, and in that let's go to the app. In that you have the dist, okay, which is basically the dist folder. In that you have the Angular app. So from this Angular app folder, I want to copy my files to user share nginx html. So basically inside the HTML folder is where you keep the files which you want to host inside of the nginx server. Alright, so now let's save that, and with this we are done creating our Docker file. Now let's see how we can use this file to build our own image. So let's open a new terminal instance. Let's clear this off. In here let's type in docker build. Give a space, give a -t, and then type in the name of the image. Then give a colon, and then you can give a tag if you want. This is optional. I can just give it as Angular app and it's going to work. But in this case, I'll just give it as 1.0. Let's type in enter. Oh yeah, apart from that, you also need to give dot, which is mandatory. So basically what it's going to do is that it's going to tell to Docker that use the existing locations Docker file. That means inside the Docker crash course folder, you have a Docker file. Okay, this is the one. Use that to create that image. So you have to specify where that image is. If you have it somewhere else, like instead of a desktop or something like that, there you can give that location. But in this case, it's going to be dot, which is going to represent the current directory. Now, if you observe what it is printing here, you'll see that it is trying to pull the registry. That is, it's going to try to pull the Docker image of that. Then it's going to go to the working directory, copy those files. Then it's going to run the NPM install. So as you can see right now, Docker is running the NPM install inside of the container. Okay, it's going to take some time, so let's wait for that. Okay, so as you can see, after that is done, it is running the npm build command, and that is going to build the actual project itself. Okay, now once that is done, it has cached our image and it has exported all the layers and it is done. Right, so now what happened is that it has created our own image which we can use to spin up multiple containers. So now let's type in docker images to see the images that we have. You'll see that we have multiple images here, but there is one image called as Angular app which has a tag called 1.0. So it has not modified because I had already created with the same code, but basically this is the one representing our build that we had just did. So now we can use this image to spin up our own Angular container as well. Right, so let's type in the docker images. Right, so we'll be using the Angular app, right? So let's type in docker run, give a space, -d, give a space, -p, it's going to be the port, and in the port I'm going to say something like 3333, and I'm going to link that to the port 80 because nginx is going to run on that particular port. Then give a name, then give a space, and then let's type in the image name. Alright, so now let's type in enter. Alright, so it seems like it was created. Let's type in docker ps. So our Docker container is now running on port 3333, hosting our Angular application. So let's open the browser and let's see whether we were successful or not. Okay, so our application is now live, and as you can see on the port 3333, which we had exposed. But internally it is linked to a port called as 80 inside the container. Now you can use all the previous commands that you had learned to debug if anything goes wrong, or you can log into that, or you can spin up or stop or start any of the containers that you want whenever you want. So with that, we are basically done with all the concepts that you need to know as a beginner to get started with Docker and build your own images and create your own containers as well. Now you can upload this particular image to the Docker Hub public repository, and you can use that and download that into any other system of your friends or anybody that you want and spin up the container there as well. The only requirement is that they need to have Docker installed, which is pretty easy to install as well. Alright, so that's it for this video, guys. I hope you have liked what you have seen till now. If you did, then please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.